Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking into this fascinating figure, Samuel Rutherford.
Yeah.
Might not be a household name, but stick with us because his story is, well, it's really something else.
Oh, it is.
We're going to be taking a look at this excerpt from a book about religious freedom. And Rutherford, he's a key figure in this whole story.
Really interesting how this source starts off with a journal entry from this English merchant
Okay.
traveling through Scotland in the 1600s. And he talks about hearing 3 different preachers in one day,
Wow.
each one revealing a different aspect of God.
So it's like a 17th century preacher sampler platter or something?
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
You've got Robert Blair, he's all about God's majesty. And then you've got David Dixon laying bare the listener's heart.
Right.
And then comes Samuel Rutherford, the little fair man.
Okay.
And according to this merchant, just blew everyone away by revealing the loveliness of Christ.
I love that.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
it really sets the stage for understanding his impact.
So who was this Samuel Rutherford guy?
Well, he was born in Scotland around 1600.
Okay.
And this is interesting.
What's that?
He wasn't always a saintly figure.
Oh, really?
He even regretted what he called his careless youth.
Careless youth. What does that even mean?
Right, makes you wonder what kind of mischief he was up to.
I know, right?
But those youthful indiscretions, whatever they were,
Yeah.
they make his later transformation all the more striking.
Yeah, definitely.
Dedicated his life to ministry, ended up in this tiny parish called Anwath back in 1627.
And Anwas.
Yeah,
Now, before we get there, tell me about his predecessor, John Welsh.
okay.
Our source mentions that he was known for his intense piety.
Yeah, like praying for his congregation in the middle of the night.
Wow, that's dedication.
That's serious commitment.
So were Rutherford and Welsh cut from the same cloth?
Both deeply devoted, yeah.
Okay.
But what's fascinating is that they shared a strong opposition to the king interfering in church affairs.
Oh, so they were troublemakers.
Oh, you could say that.
I like it.
And you guessed it, got them both exiled.
Wow, exiled.
Really. Highlights how intertwined religion and politics were back then.
That's so interesting how history repeats itself.
Yeah, it does.
Okay, so picture Rutherford in this tiny parish of Anwath.
Mm-hmm.
I'm picturing more like a barn than a grand cathedral.
Yeah, probably not a whole lot of stained glass.
Right.
Spends 9 years pouring his heart into his ministry there.
9 years. That's dedication.
It really is.
Especially considering it wasn't all smooth sailing for him.
No, not at all. He faced discouragement and challenges right from the start.
But he persevered.
He did his impact on that small congregation. It was profound.
It makes you wonder what kept him going.
Well, his faith, certainly.
Yeah.
But also, this was a time of immense theological debate.
Right.
Rutherford, he wasn't one to shy away from controversy.
I like this guy already.
His book, An Apology for Divine Grace, ended up getting him exiled to Aberdeen in 1636.
Exiled for writing a book?
Imagine that.
I can't even imagine.
Pretty intense times.
But-
But as they say, every cloud has a silver lining.
That's right.
This is where the famous letters of Samuel Rutherford come in.
Okay, those letters, they weren't even meant to be published, right?
No, initially just personal correspondence with his congregation back in Anwath,
Right.
but they became this source of timeless spiritual guidance and comfort for people far beyond his little parish.
It's amazing how things like that happen.
It is.
Those letters, they're packed with metaphor.
Yeah, it's drawing from Isaiah Song of Solomon all over the place.
Okay.
He talks about the church as the bride of Christ, the vineyard of the Lord, even a ship navigating through rough waters.
So relatable even today.
He uses these everyday images to tackle universal themes.
Right.
Doubt, suffering, longing for God.
It's raw.
Yeah. Honest, incredibly moving.
So we've got Rutherford, the tender shepherd,
Yeah.
writing these heartfelt letters.
Well, here's where things get really interesting.
Okay, I'm listening.
He wasn't just a pastor.
Okay.
He was a serious theologian.
Oh,
And he was about to shake things up even more.
all right, let's hear it.
He eventually returns from exile,
Mm.
dives headfirst into the theological landscape of the time.
Okay.
He even plays a role in writing the Westminster Confession of Faith.
Hold on, for those of us who aren't theology buffs,
Sure.
what exactly is the Westminster Confession of Faith?
Basically, it's a cornerstone document for Presbyterianism.
Okay.
Outlines key theological beliefs. Think of it as a guidebook.
Got it. So Rutherford, he had a hand in crafting that guidebook.
He did.
That's pretty impressive.
It is.
But then he goes and writes this book called Lex Rex.
Right.
Now, this is where things get controversial, right?
Lex Rex basically argued for limiting the king's power and promoting civil rights.
Whoa. That's pretty radical for the 17th century.
Remember, this was a time of absolute monarchy.
Yeah, where the king's word was law.
Exactly.
So Rutherford's basically challenging the entire power structure of his time.
Yeah, you could say that.
And all because of his faith.
That seems so...
That's bold.
It was bold.
No wonder the book got publicly burned and he was indicted.
It's a testament to how deeply Rutherford's faith influenced his views on everything.
Right. He saw no separation between his personal beliefs and his public actions.
Yeah, powerful example of how faith can be a driving force for social and political change.
So we've got this incredible figure,
Yeah.
pastor writing intimate letters to his flock, theologians shaping the church's doctrine,
Right.
and a fearless advocate for political reform.
It's quite a combination.
What strikes you most about Rutherford so far?
For me, it's that unwavering conviction,
Yeah.
that courage to challenge the status quo, even when it meant risking everything.
Totally. It really makes you think about the power of one person's voice
Definitely.
and the ripple effects their actions can have.
Absolutely. Even centuries later.
But before we get ahead of ourselves,
Right.
we need to delve deeper into those letters and
Yeah.
that controversial Lex Rex.
Okay, I'm ready.
You ready to keep digging?
Let's do it.
Okay, so we've established Samuel Rutherford was this incredible blend of pastor, theologian, and political activist. But let's zoom in on those letters he wrote. They weren't meant to be published, but they've resonated with people for centuries.
Yeah.
What's the secret sauce? What makes them so timeless?
Well, one thing that jumps out is how Rutherford masterfully uses imagery to convey profound spiritual truths.
Okay.
And it's not highfalutin abstract stuff.
Yeah.
He draws inspiration from the everyday lives of the people he was writing to.
Got it.
For example, there's this recurring nautical theme that runs through many of the letters.
Ships and sailing. Wait, wasn't Anwath where he ministered right near the Solway Firth?
Exactly.
So he wasn't just pulling those images out of thin air, was he?
No, not at all. He was tapping into something familiar, something his congregation could easily visualize.
Right.
In one letter, he even tells his friend John Kennedy to have all in readiness against the time that you must sail through the black and impetuous Jordan
Wow.
with Jesus as the pilot.
Powerful imagery. Life is a journey with Jesus at the helm, navigating us through those inevitable rough waters. I'm sensing a theme here.
What's that?
Facing challenges, persevering through trials.
Absolutely. And he doesn't sugarcoat it.
Right.
He acknowledges the storms, the uncertainty, the fear that can creep in, but he also emphasizes the constant presence of Christ, our guide, through those treacherous seas.
It's like he's saying, hey, life can get messy, but you're not alone in this. There's comfort in that, but also a challenge to stay the course, to keep trusting the captain even when the waves are crashing around you.
And that's where preparation comes in.
Okay.
He writes to Lady Kenmure, look for crosses, and while it is fair weather, mend the sails of the ship.
I like that.
It's practical advice, both for the spiritual journey and for life in general.
Don't wait for the storm to hit before you batten down the hatches.
Right. Take care of your spiritual ship when times are good so you're ready for whatever comes your way.
Makes sense.
Now, alongside this nautical imagery, Rutherford frequently uses another powerful metaphor.
Oh.
The church is the bride of Christ.
Oh, right. I remember this from the first part. It's like he's drawing from the Song of Solomon, all that passionate language of love and longing.
Exactly. There's this deep yearning for union with Christ, this anticipation of heaven that permeates his letters.
Yeah.
And this theme resonated so deeply that it actually inspired a famous hymn.
Wait, seriously, which one?
It's called The Sands of Time Are Sinking, written by Mrs. A.R. Cousin.
Oh.
Remember that line? The bride eyes, not her garment, but her dear bridegroom's face.
Wow. Now that you mention it, I do.
Shifting our focus from earthly distractions to the beauty of Christ.
That's a powerful image.
It's about prioritizing that intimate relationship with God above all else, and in a world obsessed with appearances and what everyone else thinks, it's a message that still hits home, doesn't it?
It really does. So we've got these letters overflowing with vivid imagery and personal reflections on faith, doubt, suffering. But as our source points out, Rutherford wasn't just a mystic writing in isolation. This guy was deeply involved in the theological and political debates of his day. It's like he had this multifaceted personality.
He was a true Renaissance man in many ways.
He was.
Remember, he helped write the Westminster Confession of Faith?
Right.
For those tuning in who aren't familiar, this document is like the Presbyterian theological playbook.
Okay.
And to think this same guy who crafted such a foundational document also poured his heart into these intimate letters.
Talk about range.
It is pretty remarkable.
Okay, so let's shift gears back to that controversial book of his, Lex Rex. This is where he really stirred the pot, right? Challenging the king's absolute authority in the 17th century. That's not for the faint of heart.
It was a bold move, to say the least.
It was?
Lex Rex argues that even kings are subject to law, a radical concept at the time.
Yeah.
It's a testament to how deeply Rutherford's faith informed his political views.
Yeah.
He believed that God's law superseded any earthly ruler.
So he wasn't just calling for political reform, he was making a theological argument for it.
Exactly.
It's amazing how he saw these seemingly separate spheres, the personal and the political, as intricately connected.
And the concept that still resonates today, this idea that our faith should inform how we engage with the world around us, even in the political arena.
It's like that old saying, faith without works is dead. Rutherford wasn't just talking the talk. He was walking the walk, even when it meant going against the grain and facing serious consequences. So we've got Rutherford the pastor, Rutherford the theologian, and Rutherford the activist all rolled into one fascinating figure. What stands out to you most about this complex man?
You know, for me, it's that consistency, that integrity. Whether he was writing personal letters to his congregation or challenging the king's authority, his actions were always rooted in his deep faith.
Right.
He was a man who lived what he believed.
I hear you. It's a powerful example of how faith isn't just a private affair. It can be a driving force for making a difference in the world, even when it's difficult, even when it's risky now. I know we've been bouncing around between those personal letters and his more public works.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up, I want to circle back to Lex Rex and dig into the core principles that made it so revolutionary.
Okay.
You ready to dive deeper?
Let's do it.
Okay, so we explored Rutherford the pastor pouring his heart out in those incredible letters, and Rutherford the theologian shaping the church's doctrine. Now let's tackle Rutherford the activist, the man who dared to challenge the king's authority with this radical book, Lex Rex. What was so revolutionary about it?
Well, remember, this is 17th century Europe. Absolute monarchy was the norm. Kings were considered God's representatives on earth, their power unquestionable. But Rutherford, he turns that whole idea on its head.
He's basically saying, hold on, even kings have to answer to a higher authority. It's like he's laying the groundwork for modern ideas of limited government and checks and balances.
Precisely, Lex Rex, which translates to law is king, argues that even kings are subject to law. Rutherford believed that God's law was supreme, and that no earthly ruler could violate those fundamental principles of justice and righteousness.
So it wasn't just about limiting the king's power for the sake of it. It was about upholding a higher law, a divine standard that everyone, even the king, had to answer to. That's a pretty radical concept for the time.
Absolutely, and it's directly tied to the idea of religious freedom. Rutherford argued that if the king could dictate religious matters, forcing people to conform to his beliefs, then true freedom of conscience was impossible.
It's like he's making the case that you can't have true religious freedom without some form of limited government. The king can't just impose his will on everyone's souls. There needs to be space for individual conscience and belief.
Exactly, and this idea that religious freedom requires constraints on government power, it's a cornerstone of many modern democracies. It's fascinating to see how Rutherford, writing centuries ago, was grappling with these issues that are still so relevant today.
It's a reminder that these core principles of liberty and individual rights, they weren't just handed to us. People fought for them, sometimes risking their lives and reputations, like Rutherford with his Lex Rex.
It's a powerful legacy, and it makes you wonder what Rutherford would make of our world today, where those same principles are still being debated and challenged.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from those intimate letters to that radical treatise on the limits of power. Before we wrap things up, I want to go back to those letters for a moment. Our source mentions that Rutherford's writing can be a bit dense, full of metaphors and theological language.
It's true, it's not exactly light reading, but for those willing to slow down to really savor his words, it can be a deeply rewarding experience.
It's like stepping into a different time, a different way of thinking and speaking, but beneath that archaic language, there's this raw honesty, this vulnerability that still resonates today. It's like he's inviting you into this intimate conversation about faith doubt and the yearning for God's presence.
And that's what makes those letters so timeless. They speak to the deepest longings of the human heart, the search for meaning and connection, the struggle to make sense of suffering and find hope in the midst of darkness.
It makes you wonder, what can we, living in this fast-paced, information-saturated world, learn from a man who wrote letters by candlelight centuries ago?
Perhaps it's a reminder to slow down, to create space for silence and reflection, to cultivate that inner life that Rutherford so eloquently describes. In a world that's constantly bombarding us with noise and distractions, those letters offer a countercultural invitation to stillness, to listening, to deeper connection with ourselves and with God.
It's a powerful message and one that I think we all need to hear. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of Samuel Rutherford, I want to leave you with this thought. What will you take away from this encounter? What will you do with the insights and inspiration you've gleaned from this extraordinary life?
Will you accept Rutherford's invitation to slow down, to delve into those letters, to discover the beauty and depth of his words for yourself? The journey awaits.
Until next time, keep diving deep.